show you how to make the best egg McMuffins at home, but sheepified. Hello shepherds, welcome back. And if you're new here, hello. This is where we talk all things sheepy. My name's Megan, and today we're transforming a restaurant classic to a farm fresh sheep-based treat. But for people, not sheep, mostly. First off, this muffin is easier to make with a bit of planning. I forgot to plan, so I'm going to start this early in the day with our preferment. Also, on a note about the ingredients, I'm using our sheepy-based ghee, and if you want to substitute with your own homemade butter or store-bought butter or ghee, it works too. I like to use recipes that are pretty flexible, because do you know who's inflexible? The sheep. They love a solid routine and holler at the cabin, or when I'm pulling into the driveway too, if I'm late. So let's go ahead and grab a good-sized bowl and start adding in our pre-ferment ingredients. We're going to mix in our flour, 1.5 cups or 190 grams of all-purpose flour, 3/4 of a teaspoon of yeast, and around 252 grams of water or 3/4 of a cup. We're going to stir this together until smooth and well combined. I've done this with a spoonful of sourdough discard added in, and when the sheep are in milk, I've added milk instead, or even buttermilk for that extra pop of flavor. But for today, it's water, and we'll add those flavor pops in later on. Our pre-ferment batter will be pretty thick, similar to say waffle or pancake batter. And next up, let's cover our bowl and ferment it at room temperature for a minimum of 1 hour. If you're making this the night before, I like to ferment it in the fridge because the longer you ferment it, the more flavor it tends to develop. But for today, we're going to settle for 2 hours. And look how bubbly it is. I'm going to try and squeeze in the dough in this bowl, so let's go ahead and get busy. To make our dough, we're going to add 1 cup or 120 grams of all-purpose flour, 1 teaspoon or 6 grams of table salt, 1 teaspoon or 4 grams of sugar, and 2 tablespoons or 18 grams of ghee or butter, melted if you're using that, into our pre-ferment bowl. If you have a mixer with a dough hook, it comes together super fast, but I wanted to show you how to mix this up without any special tools. When making this dough, it is better to weigh your ingredients, and I just refilled my flour bin, so the flour is extra fluffy today. If you find your flour extra fluffy too, or your dough too wet, it's okay to add more flour and adjust your dough. This dough here is a bit on the wetter end of my preference, but I'm going to leave it as is. Okay, so now that it's pretty much come together, let's knead it a little. I find it helps to wet my hands and fold the dough in a few times. As I'm kneading, I'm feeling how wet the dough is, judging its consistency. Do I want it this wet, or perhaps use some more flour? What's today's preference? Okay, so let's set our dough aside and cover it with a dish or a cutting board. Works really well too. This is to let the flour rehydrate and relax for our next fold. Okay, so an hour's passed, and this part can be fun, but if you don't like messy hands, I've done this in the mixing bowl and then take it off the dough hook and for the rest periods, and then pop it back under the mixer when it's time to fold again. We're going to fold our dough with wetted hands here, and then do a scoop and fold method, working around our bowl. You may notice how the texture of the dough starts to feel so smooth. It really reminds me of that sensation of stretching mozzarella. Just a few times, 5 or 6 times. I usually fold it until I feel the dough resisting just a bit. And then let's cover our dough and let it rest for another hour. After about an hour, we're going to repeat our folding process again, and then cover our dough and let it rest for another hour. But if you end up losing count, it's okay. They'll taste delicious. This step is more for developing that gluten and trapping those bubbles and developing those lovely croggles to carry our eggs and sauces and cheeses later on. Okay, so an hour's passed, and so we folded our dough 3 or more times. Let's go ahead and tip our dough out onto a prepared surface. I'm using a canvas cloth, preloaded with flour. Also, I have a baking sheet that I liberally dusted with cornmeal. If you're worried about your muffins sticking, lining your sheet pan with a parchment paper and then dusting on top of that with some cornmeal really helps too. Okay, so let's roll out our dough to about 1/2 inch to 2 centimeters thick about. When our muffins are getting cooked, they do tend to puff up a bit too. Okay, so I'm using a biscuit cutter, but a knife or a cookie cutter works really well too. If you find your cutter sticking to the dough, it really helps to lightly dust the cutter with some flour and then twist as you're cutting the dough. And then we're going to transfer our cut muffin out into our prepared pan. Once all our muffins are cut out, let's go ahead and knead our scraps together and cut out our last muffins. The last scrapes always tend to be a little bit more scraggly than the first cuts, but that's okay because they still bake up pretty well. Now that all our muffin dough is cut out, we want to cover our muffins and let them rest for another 30 minutes. I'm using a baking sheet to cover them. A towel may work, but sometimes I find the muffin dough dries out anyway, depending on the season. And plastic wrap works well too if you have that on hand. Okay, so let's go ahead and preheat our skillet. I'm going to do this one at a time, but then I'm going to go ahead and pull out some more of our skillets to reduce that cooking time. With the pan being warmed up on medium-low, we want to cook each biscuit about 10 minutes per side. It'll puff up some while cooking, and it'll get a nice brown bottom. If you're using a parchment paper, don't forget to take off that paper when you put it on the skillet. These do take a while to put together initially, but it's really fun to make ahead, and then use them for meals over the course of a couple of days. From egg muffins to toast and jam, or even mini paninis. Okay, so 10 minutes have passed, so let's go ahead and flip our muffin. Notice how deep golden brown the bottom is. If you prefer a lighter brown, that's okay too. And then after another 10 minutes have passed, let's go ahead and take this one off and cook our next muffin. Okay, so once all of our muffins are cooked, let's go ahead and set them aside to cool a bit while we get our toppings ready. For today, I'm using some hard sheep cheese. It's a bit of a failure. The rind is an ash rub, which is where you get that black color, and it's a partial bloomy rind. I really love the flavor of bloomy molds and how they impart this mushroom and earthy flavor to the cheese, but it didn't quite cover the ash as fully as I really wanted. So although it's not ideal, it tastes pretty good. I'm slicing this cheese thinly to help it melt fully into the layer below. The cheese has this wonderful tanginess, almost like a citrus zest, but not really that mushroom flavor that I wanted. Next up, we're going to be adding our classic maple bacon. I like it pretty crispy, and that crunchy texture is a really fun contrast. And then next, let's add one of our chicken's eggs, lightly fried in some of that leftover bacon fat. I want to add all the toppings while they're hot so that internal heat really carries over and melts the cheese below. On the cold nights, it's really fun to have such a warming dish. Okay, so let's go ahead and cut this in half. I'm going to share one half with a family member. Otherwise, I just dig in right as is. But it's a pretty fun, especially breakfast for dinner kind of fun meal. It's a simple meal, but flavor-wise, it's pretty complex. There's the nuttiness coming through from the ghee, and it combines really well with that sharp, tangy flavors from the sheepy cheese. And then contrasted with that salty sweetness from the maple bacon. The egg really gives it this full body flavor and richness as well. It's a pretty hearty but also filling meal. Let me know if you make it. And it really works too with so many cheeses. So if you don't like ash-coated bloomy cheeses, cheddar, jacks work really well too. So it's really up to your favorite cheese type. The sky's the limit, really. So if you made it this far, an extra special thank you. I appreciate you. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell icon so you never miss a sheepy take. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Ta-tas!